Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are watching this. I appreciate you here. Thank you for tuning in. Today I wanted to talk a little bit more on the empowerment series, the contrast and the duality of what we're facing. There's some things going on right now in the world that are pretty troubling and a lot of confusion. It not only means that that's happening on the outside, but it's also the same kind of conflict that we're experiencing on the inside. And sometimes it's not even seen. We can't really even see it because it is in our unseen parts of us. So just for a little bit of a summary, the duality of who we are is we have the outer body, the outer self, and we have the inner self. And the outer self is the seen, and the inner self is the unseen. The outer self is the expression of the self, and the inner self, the unseen, is the real self. Uh, the outer self is also what experiences physical sickness, and the inner self is where we can work on bringing that exterior sickness to bay, where we can begin to work with it and deal with it, because so much of inner sickness involves emotional components as well, or it involves choices that we're making out in the world that maybe are not going to be conducive to the empowerment that we want. So when we are in our outer self, the sickness that we might get, what's happening there is we're actually denying our inner self, and we're making war against the symptoms. So we fight them with different things that are usually chemically based. Sometimes we use more natural things, but usually people who are going towards the more natural tend to work on their inner self. It just seems to work that way. Some people will take herbs and still be into that space, and usually how I see it is that they cross the line a lot and still are ready to take any chemical medication. So it's kind of a mix-up of what's happening. Of course, if you are on heavy medications, I just want to say don't quit them quickly, because that can be dangerous. But just be aware that if you are battling your inner self and making war with the symptoms, then there's an issue there about sickness that you're not dealing with, that you're denying your inner self and what that is crying out to teach you. So then the health is the inner self will bring the health, and the inner self will recognize and face the emotional triggers. It'll face the beliefs that we're believing in or leaning toward, and it will begin to alter the exterior or the outer. It will begin to alter that as we begin to go deeper into the invisible part. So we want to find that balance between the health and the sickness and the inner and the outer and the seen and the unseen. We need to find that balance basically between internal and external. So the power is with our choices. We have choice. We have free will. Not only do we have free will, so far anyway, with ourself, we should have a free will with our environment or with our country's governance and how we operate in that regard as well. We shouldn't have somebody talking to us and telling us what to do. We should choose to think for ourselves and to come to our own conclusions. And of course, to live in a society that does that, it tends to have people be much more responsible for themselves and for their actions. And in that way, we can live much more peaceably, because people are owning their own dirty backyard instead of pointing the finger and making blame. So let me explain that a little bit further. When we are in submission to something or somebody, or just the way our behavior is, that's going to bring about sickness, because we're not able to be empowered and we're not able to identify the balance, what's needed to make that balance happen. When we are in health, we are choosing to be sovereign, because truly being in health, you have to make your own choices about your own physical body and what's good for it and what isn't good for it. try things out, see how it works. Be very tuned into what the body's saying, what the body's doing, and all of that. So to get into the invisible inner self, you have to choose to let go of these negative emotions, and you have to loosen the trauma that has been experienced through either this life or if you go into past lives, however you identify with that. It's really loosening the trauma and cleaning out the areas that have been hurt and harmed, which is holding us into that negative state where we want to ignore the inner self, and then we move into the disempowerment of submission. And to do it, to get rid of that trauma and all of that, we have to also do it very cleanly. It needs to be cut sharply. We can remember it and we can honor the experience, but we need to just clean it up. We need to just cut away from it. We need to choose not to hang on anymore. When the balance is there between the visible and the invisible, then the consciousness is going to be one of trust, and trust will bring in actions that are different. It will bring in words that are more empowering, and it will bring in integrity. If we move that into from the inner self of how we're dealing with ourselves, and we move that into a community, we're going to be in a better state to trust others joyfully, because we'll understand that they're also working with themselves. They're also dealing with themselves. They're not going to be trying to do anything because they're getting into their sense of a moral compass and also the integrity of what humanity is really supposed to be like, not this crazy stuff that we're seeing. And we're not supposed to be ruled by emotions that are confusing and negative and bring our vibration downward, because the vibration now, including on the planet itself with the Schumann resonance, is raising. It's getting higher and higher, and that is part of why there's so much turmoil here, because those of us who are dealing with our inner selves, and I do see a lot of people who are doing that, they're at different stages. So when we get into this area where we are understanding that people are all working on themselves at varying degrees, we can begin to have reasonable discussions. We can begin to feed off of other people's ideas and begin to work together as a community and even as a planet Earth of humans, human beings, without the influence of things that are trying to put humanity into a submissive position, which is what is going on right now. Our condition of health is one of really, it's really about choosing sovereignty or submission. And that will carry out to the outer world as well. It boils down to that, which is quite interesting, I think, because, you know, what we're seeing happening out in the world with all of this turmoil, with the burning and all of that, that's done by people that are highly suppressed. They may not seem suppressed, but they are suppressed because they aren't thinking about the damage that they're doing to people who have had nothing to do with an incident that is supposedly the spark of all of this. There were peaceful people out there who had a grievance, and that's okay, that's allowable. We need to let our emotions out. But when those emotions turn to violence and damage and violent actions against one another, that's because they're being controlled and they're submissive to it, but they don't see it. They feel like it's power from themselves, but it really isn't. They're really being suppressed in a lot of ways. And the sad thing is as they go through doing that, they're going to find themselves on a very negative path. So if we have a grievance with one another and we're being healthy in working towards things and we want to see the best for everybody, then what we're going to do is we're going to sit down, we're going to be able to talk with one another, we're going to be able to feed off each other's ideas and begin to figure solutions and work together. And also be able to work together where all of us have the opportunity to be able to be healthy and prosper and have what we want, rather than having to be at the submissive ends of a greedy group of people who are putting an illusion before our eyes that the reality is this way and that they are the only ones that can have the prosperity and the rest of us have to serve them. It just works that way. It works with both sides of the fence. It's outside in our outer self and how our behavior becomes when we're not working on ourselves or when we are working on ourselves. But then it extends itself into the community because that's how we create the reality. If we're given a bunch of orders that this is the way it is and you have to do this and you have to do that, then you're not going to be able to sit down with people and create something differently because you've made a choice to follow the rules. And rule following is fine when everybody agrees upon it, but if it's not agreed upon and people don't like something, they have a right to express that so that that can be worked through with civility and with a lot of care for one another. So I want to just leave you with this idea that we heal from within, not only ourselves, but we also we can heal communities by healing from within ourselves. We can change the reality out there by healing from within. And I want everybody to understand that those of us who have gotten to the point where we understand what the freedom is, what the responsibility is, what sovereignty is, what it means to work on our inner self and overcome these negative emotions and negative behaviors and negative thoughts. That's my freedom. And my freedom is not going to end where your fear begins. If you're fearful about something, which is what we just went through, and still I see it with mask wearing, I know what the story is. I know what the narrative is. That was there because they wanted suppression. They wanted you to serve, they wanted you to choose being submissive to them. Some of us are not following that because we understand that it is a group of people putting this illusion before our eyes. Yes, there's something out there, but freedom is a dangerous place to live in. There's threats all over the place. It's not just this one invisible thing that they conjured up. But if your fear is going to be out there and you haven't dealt with it, that's fine. You can choose that. But don't you push your fear on me, and don't you make me submit to the idea that I have to behave within your fear. Because my freedom does not end with somebody else's fear. My state of mind and goodness towards other people is going to be there regardless whether or not you're fearful or not. And that's part of the empowerment process. If we want to be empowered, we've got to also let other people make their choices. If you want to be fearful, if you want to wear the mask, that's fine. Do it if it makes you feel better. But do not push your fear on anybody else, because then you're requiring submission from somebody else instead of freedom. So that's a little bit of how we create our future. We can create our future. And the quote that Thomas Jefferson said that I have quoted before, and I'm going to say it just again, I don't have it in front of me, so I might get it a little wrong. But he basically said that religion and politics and philosophy should never come between a friendship. So if we begin to be friends with one another, if we begin to overlook the things that we have been taught to judge them over, we're going to be able to change the future for our children and for our grandchildren. And I think that's a really important thing to begin to strive toward. Sort through things, find facts, find truth, honor one another, be joyful in our differences, be civil with one another, choose freedom over submission if you want to. And if you choose submission, let the people be free. But don't pull them under just because somebody is choosing not to work on themselves and want to choose to stay in that submission. So with that, I just needed to say all that to you. I thank you so much for viewing and watching. Thank you so much for your comments, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you.